Okay, well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Art Deco Society's talk on Australian Art Deco hotels. My name is Jo Crotty. I'm a member of the Art Deco Society Organising Committee, and I'm your host for this evening. As you will have spotted, we are in Zoom webinar mode, which means that we can't see you or hear you, which means if you're in your pajamas, that's fine because no one will ever know. And if you want to ask a question of the speaker, then please do so by putting it in the Q&A slot. And you do that by clicking on the Q&A button at the top of the screen. And at the end of the talk, I will ask the questions on your behalf. So I'm going to introduce tonight's speaker. Unfortunately, because Jeff is currently in Australia, we've tried, but his camera has decided it's not waking up yet. And so you'll be able to hear him and see his fantastic slides, but unfortunately you won't be able to see him. So this evening's talk, Australian Art Deco Hotels, is about how the nation's love of a cold beer led to an Art Deco architectural phenomenon. And our speaker this evening is Geoff Goddard, an internationally awarded art director, photographer and designer who's been passionate about Art Deco for over 25 years. Since graduating from the University of South Australia with a BA in Visual Art, he has lived in Sydney, where he's worked as a freelance art director whilst pursuing his passion for photographing 20th century architecture around the world. He has exhibited in Australia and internationally and was a finalist in the prestigious 2017 Head-On Landscape Photography Awards. His book, Australian Art Deco Hotels, was shortlisted for the 2020 Australian National Trust Heritage Awards. So I'm now going to hand it over to Jeff. Please do put any questions you have in the Q&A and I'll return to them at the end. So I'll see you then. All yours, Jeff.
Okay, thank you, Jo. And yeah, apologies again for my camera not working. We couldn't get it working in the preferences on this laptop that I've got at the moment. So I do apologise for that. And thank you to the UK Art Deco Society for having me along to give this talk. It's quite early in the morning here, so I'm on coffee and water, and I'm hoping you guys are sitting back relaxing with a beer or a cocktail. So just going to go through slide presentation. There's quite a few to get through, so I'll try to go as quickly as possible. As Jo said, it's a bit of a rundown on my 2019 book, currently out of print, unfortunately. I'm working on a new book at the moment, so once that's done, I will probably look at doing a reprint of this. So just to get underway, little rundown of the talk. So I'll just give a little introduction about myself and some of my work, about the project, a little trip around Australia looking at some of my favourite pubs, a little bit of the history of why so many were built, and then a look at Sydney's hotels, Sydney really being the epicenter of Art Deco hotels in Australia. So after that, we'll have some questions and we'll get underway. So a bit of background about me. Yeah, I started collecting Art Deco furniture way back in about 1990. And then after completing my BA, moved to Sydney, where I worked as a digital designer for quite a while, and then moved into art directing and advertising. At the moment, I work more in digital design again, while I pursue my photographic passions. And here's just a little bit of some of my collection. A little bit of this is in storage now. You can see that red kitchen table on the left is where I'm sitting at the moment. I used to buy and sell Art Deco antiques for a while as well to help supplement my meager university income and to help my collection expand. And you can see here some more of the stuff. I don't know if anyone here is a depression glass fan, but yeah, got quite a collection of the Grantham vases and other depression glasses. You can see a bit of Susie Cooper down the bottom. Yeah, so been doing architectural photography road trips probably for about 15 years or so now. Started out posting online on Flickr, created the Sydney Art Deco photo group on there. You know, eventually, after a while, moved to Instagram and Facebook to start publishing my images, which has led to exhibiting my work in Australia, photography festivals around the world. And here you can see some of my photos that I've taken. These ones are all from LA. It's become quite a favourite place for me to go on photo trips these days. Such a wealth of Art Deco and other architecture. These are from a new book I'm working on at the moment, which hopefully will be out towards the end of next year. I've got a deadline of March 1st with the publisher to get this done. So I've taken a few days off from writing to get back into the Australian Art Deco hotels book and brush up on my notes. You can see some more great American Art Deco architecture, Miami and LA. No doubt most of you will recognise Southgate Tube Station there. And over time, I developed an interest in not just Art Deco architecture, but mid-century modern, Googie, and even brutalist architecture that I've been photographing. And pretty much, actually, a lot of these buildings are in my next book, where I'm laying out chronologically some of my best buildings that I've photographed over the years. Also do more road trip style photography as well. I try not to do too much what they call ruin porn. I have photographed some on my travels, but I do prefer to photograph buildings that are functioning still and have been preserved. And I've also taken this into a fine art realm as well, where I start to play with the forms of buildings, create these floating shapes. And here's a bit of recent stuff from this year. So yeah, both of these have been finalists in two major photography prizes this year. Didn't win either, but it's always nice to be in the finalist lists. So a little bit about the project. Way back in 2007, probably about a year or so after I started to get back into photography. I probably spent 10 years after leaving college where I didn't really pick up a camera at all. And then when digital cameras came out, I started to get interested in photography again. And I did a trip to the US where I went to New York, Chicago, Miami, some of the great Art Deco cities, and started to compile some images of buildings. And I think Miami was the first time where I started to use Google Maps as a way to locate the buildings, and started to hone my technique on researching and hunting them down to photograph. And then one of the real catalysts for me starting to go around Australia photographing Art Deco, streamline modern architecture, was back in 2008, Christmas time. I was down in my old hometown of Adelaide, and on Boxing Day, which is one of the quietest days on the calendar in Adelaide, I walked around the city with my camera, photographing the buildings that I knew. And I walked down Hindley Street to what was the Metro Theatre. Was actually built in 1939, was designed by one of Metro Mayor Goldman's New York architects, Thomas W. Lamb. So little old Adelaide had this bit of New York architecture, which unfortunately was no longer there when I went looking for it back in 2008. And on the right-hand side there, you can see the you can see the building that replaced it. Some fairly bland student accommodation with a KFC down the bottom. And you will notice on the left that the pub survived, of course, which feeds into a bit into the narrative of why there's so many Art Deco pubs that survived as well. But unfortunately, the Metro was not there, and it was a bit of a catalyst for me to think, well, I want to travel around Australia and try and photograph as many of these buildings as I can. So I started researching buildings via blogs, Flickr, museum resources, library, heritage resources, whatever I could find. And here's me researching back in the day. So this is probably about 15 years ago, drawing up maps. Very old shot on the right there of my travel camera gear. It's expanded a little bit since then. And then out on the road with my maps, working out the route I was going to take, what time the light is going to be on each building, and I create these running sheets for each trip. So a little bit of military precision is involved with maximizing your time when you're on the road. A lot of this I do more digitally now than print out. So I just have a PDF that I store in the cloud, and then locally on my computer and on my phone, and also using Google Maps more than the actual printed maps. And yeah, so anytime I could get some holidays or some time off, I would target different bits of Australia where I was going to travel to and photograph. On the left there, you can see sunny North Queensland, camping by the beach, and on the right there, I think that was somewhere down in Victoria. Very essential to have the little cooker with the coffee pot. One of the most essential parts of a road trip. And for about 10 years, I clocked up 35,000 Ks, or just over 21,000 miles in driving, getting to different towns and places to photograph architecture. And I thought I'd just put these in to show that Australia's not all palm trees and beaches. There was a little bit of driving through the middle of nowhere to get to places. It's a little bit Mad Max there on the right, which is out near Winton in far north Queensland. And so over time, I started to create a fairly extensive photo library of Australia's Art Deco architecture. This is the former Australian Institute of Anatomy, built in 1930 in Canberra, which now houses the National Film and Sound Archive. Former Hindmarsh Town Hall in Adelaide. Emsley Chambers in Goulburn. Some beautiful, colourful terracotta tiling. Some details from around Sydney of buildings. I sort of started compiling most of Sydney's through about 2008, and then I just didn't stop. I kept going and did the rest of Australia as well. Some homes, one on the left in Goulburn, in Albury, one on the right down in Tasmania. Former Hydro Commission building in Hobart. War Memorial in Sydney. So when I was driving I can't remember exactly where I was, but I was driving between the middle of nowhere and the middle of nowhere, and I started to really think about putting the buildings together in a book. And I had the epiphany that maybe a book just on pubs would be interesting, seeing I'd photographed so many, and I thought it would make a great Australian take on some Art Deco architecture. And so the idea for the book was born. Took me about, I'd say, nearly 3 years of production, of writing and sorting out the photos, going back and re-photographing some pubs. I think probably the last year of that was just working on production. I did everything really, from the layout design, obviously, to the writing and the photography, and trying to source printers. We'll go through some of these slides a bit later, so I'll flick through this pretty quickly. And there you can see the finished book. And then on the right, a review in the Spirit of Progress, which is the Australian Deco and Modernist Society's quarterly magazine. And then made it onto the bookshelves. I started to flicker a Instagram account there on the left to help publicize the book, and obviously did a bit of PR and got a few write-ups as a way to promote the book. So that's just a little bit of a background on how the project came about. So now I'll take a little trip around Australia, looking at some of my favorite pubs along the way, and you can see. And before I do, I will just acknowledge that obviously there are some in England, as I'm sure you're well aware. I don't know of a heap. Someone in the audience might know more than I do about how many there are in England, but here's a few of the ones that I've managed to find online, and I apologise for anyone if these are your images that I have used for this presentation. And you'll see the style of architecture quite similar to some of the pubs you're going to see in this presentation. And I love the comment here on the bottom right, and you'll notice there's one architect in Sydney who did favour this style here with the little lantern on top. He was known, Cyril Ruwald, for his use of the lantern on some of his pubs. So you can see that setting the scene of where the design came from for Australian Art Deco hotels. And they've survived more than any other building type of Art Deco buildings. There's a few banks. Commonwealth Bank of Australia were known for quite a few Art Deco banks through country areas and in the cities. And obviously there were cinemas, and there's houses, and there's major downtown buildings we still have. But what survived more than anything are the pubs, and you know they've actually played quite a big part in our cultural heritage through the years. And a couple of photos here. The one on the left, which is taken in the 1970s, and you can see the front bar here is still very much the Art Deco front bar. Hasn't really changed a great deal. You can see the font with bar on that door, the curved front of the building, and the chrome and tile bar. And it's a great little snapshot of the 1970s. So it's that 30 odd years probably after this pub was built. And I love the juxtaposition of the two generations here. You've got the older guys having a beer here. Is probably the style of pub that they'd grown up with. And then you've got this younger generation here from the 70s also having a beer in the pub. So you can see that mingling of generations. And on the right here, Australian band Midnight Oil. So pubs have always been a great venue for music, even when they were first built. And through the decades, they've become the place where many generations have gone to see bands. So they've touched many generations and become really a part of the cultural landscape. And of course, the pubs have survived because of our love of a cold beer. And I thought I'd just throw in this one of former Prime Minister Bob Hawke, in his heyday on the left there, downing a yard glass of beer. And on the right there, probably not too long before he passed away a couple of years ago, pouring a beer named after him. So between about 34 and 42, and I think you could probably hone that down even 36 to 41, maybe in those 5 years, there was just hundreds of these pubs built throughout Australia. And you can see a classic Sydney pub, Hotel Chatswood. And although Sydney is the epicenter of these Art Deco hotels, and we'll go through that at the end, they were built in every state and city and many towns throughout Australia as well. So, as I said, we'll go for a little tour around Australia, picking out some of my favourite ones before we delve into Sydney. I thought I'd just show a comparison to how big Australia is compared to England. I'm sure most of you know that, but it involves a lot of driving, a lot of flying, and then hiring a car and driving, or just driving to get from point A to point B. So, starting at the top, up in far north Queensland, a town called Atherton, former logging town, and up in the tablelands in from Cairns. We have the Atherton Hotel. Don't know when it was painted salmon pink or what color it was originally. You can see it's a 4X hotel. So you'll notice on these hotels as we go around, even today, even though beer companies are much more national than they used to be very state-based. So as you went from state to state, breweries specific to that state obviously owned a lot of the hotels in those states. Now it's a lot more national, and you'll have beer brands from different states owning hotels in different states. But still, you'll still notice, even going around from these photos, that the local beer companies do have a lot of promotion and stake in these hotels. Although that's changed even again since the craft brewery sort of revolution. So moving down the coast, Proserpine, which is just inland from Airlie Beach. This one built in 1940. Really interesting design. Prince of Wales Hotel. There's many hotels called the Prince of Wales. Interesting that, hot tropical far north Queensland. I think you couldn't get any further away from Wales or England than Proserpine. I love the way the name is integrated into the decoration at the top. The eyebrows above the windows, very much like Miami. We got that tropical heat, the sun bearing down during the day. Got the eyebrows out there again. Another Queensland 4X hotel. A really interesting design. Then moving inland to Winton, to the North Gregory Hotel. The monster hotel, as some of these are, obviously built in remote areas, so they were used a lot for accommodation. The North Gregory, interestingly enough, wasn't built until the early 50s, just due to World War II. It was, I think this is the third time this hotel was built due to fire. Quite often, pubs were burnt down due to fires, sometimes natural disasters as well, cyclones, bushfires, but often, you know, because they had kitchens or fireplaces, they can be hazardous places for fire, so quite often burnt down by fire. And the North Gregory is also interesting for the fact that the birth of Qantas Airways was in Winton, and it also had a famous visitor towards the end of World War II, when Lyndon Johnson's plane had to have an emergency landing nearby, and he spent about a week at this hotel. And if you go there, you can actually stay in the Lyndon Johnson room, which is this top right one here. Hopefully you can see my mouse where I'm pointing. Yeah, so you can stay in the Lyndon Johnson room. So there's quite a bit of history to this hotel. Moving further down Queensland to Mackay, it was a big sugar growing region. And we have the Ambassador from 1937, another really interesting design, not like anything else I've seen as far as Art Deco pubs in Australia goes. It's sort of based more on the old Queenslander style hotel, the big balcony, and the top there where the umbrellas are, that rooftop there isn't a new addition, which often is the way with some pubs these days, or where the rooftop bar has become a thing. This always had a rooftop bar, and in fact was used for society dances, and they had bands up there. Obviously the weather in Queensland is pretty good, so you can have a rooftop bar up there. But another really interesting one. And Mackay per se is actually, I think there's 5 or 6 Art Deco pubs just in the CBD of Mackay. Obviously had that big boom during the 40s. American troops just stationed there during World War II. Here's another pub, the Australian Hotel. You can see more in that streamlined vein. So a few years later, 1940. So by 3 years later, this pubs, and there's another really nice streamlined one there as well. So the style is definitely changing from the sort of mid-30s as you go through to the 40s. They get much more functionalist in design. The last one in Queensland, the Waterloo in Brisbane, Fortitude Valley, making the most of its corner site, as many of these pubs were built on. Streamlined design with some Art Deco embellishments. And then into New South Wales, to Armidale, another agricultural centre, the big Tattersalls Hotel. This was a new paint job. In the book, it's a different colour, but I visited it about 2 years ago, and they'd given it a fresh lick of paint, and it was looking pretty good actually. Again, Armidale's another town that's got a couple of good Art Deco pubs and some really good Art Deco buildings as well. And often when I was travelling around, you'd be hoping that every time I got on Google Maps and had a little look at different towns, you'd hope for the trifecta, which would be an Art Deco pub, an Art Deco bank, and an Art Deco cinema on the main street. Didn't always happen, but it was nice when it did. And then inland to remote Bourke. I'm not sure if anyone knows the saying back of Bourke, but it is a saying in Australia that basically means the middle of nowhere. So this is getting right out into the bush. Another older style hotel. It's from 1937. This one, you can see the big veranda around it. Unfortunately, this was closed when I photographed it 10 or so years ago. So I don't know what the fate of this hotel was or is. hopefully someone's done something with it. I'm not sure. But I distinctly remember the day I photographed this pub because it was very, very hot, and I jumped out of the car with my camera and only had thongs on. I realised within about 10 minutes that the top of my feet were getting absolutely scorched and had to run back to the car and put some shoes on. But yeah, interesting design where you've got that older Australian hotels sort of look and feel with the Art Deco embellishments around it. Down to Forbes, Central West in New South Wales, and this is your, starting to get into your typical interwar functionalist design, minimal amount of ornamentation or decoration. This one and the next one I'm about to show, much more rectilinear in their design than the curved interwar functionalist pubs that so many were built in New South Wales, mainly for the company Tooths & Co. They were the big brewer that drove a lot of the Art Deco pubs in New South Wales. And then across to Tamworth, where we see another one in that style, has a little bit of that Hilversum Town Hall by William Dudok, bit of that influence to it, and there's a number of town halls actually throughout Australia that also borrow from that school of architecture and design. But really interesting one, the Central, the brickwork, creating the elements to break up the facade. Then down to Newcastle. So Newcastle's probably Australia's biggest port. It's definitely its biggest coal export port. And back in the 30s and 40s and even before, it was a big port and shipbuilding town. It would probably have at least 10 or so Art Deco pubs just in Newcastle. And in fact, this one here I'd photographed just as part of the overall project of photographing Art Deco architecture in Australia. And I didn't actually know it was a pub until I was researching the book, and then found out that this was a pub as well. Now turned into commercial space downstairs. I'm not sure what's happening upstairs. Really commercial offices. Here's another one from Newcastle. This one's a late one. This is from 1943. And you can see the green and the bone toffee coloured terracotta tiling was a favourite of the architects as far as the decoration goes, added to these pubs to break up the earthy tones of the brickwork and give them some focal point, usually above the main front door. And just bypassing Sydney, because we're going to go back there to Penrith, which is considered an outer suburb of Sydney these days, the foot of the Blue Mountains. There we can see another typical interwar functionalist design. Patriotic name, Australian Arms Hotel. I love the rounding of the turret with the glass blocks at the top. The tiles have been replaced at street level at some point. And then up to the Blue Mountains to the tourist town of Katoomba, to the Hotel Garran, a really big country pub, one of the most impressive corner fins or finials, if you want to call them that, built to grab passers-by's attention, which it certainly does. I think this one's had a bit of a paint since these photos were taken. Once owned by Australian actor Jack Thompson. It's right near to the train station, so you can imagine back in the day people catching the train up from Sydney and getting off and staying at the Hotel Garran for a weekend. Around to Queanbeyan, which is pretty much an outer suburb of Canberra these days. Another interesting design, much sort of these two square masses with the decoration each side symmetrical. Again, the tiling at street level, I'd say, has been replaced. Would have been something matching the green up here. So you can see from some of the ones I'm showing here, just that variation of design depending on where in Australia they were built. And then down to Deniliquin, which is a country town towards the border of Victoria, and one of my favourite pubs. Although I will say that a couple of times during the talk, so I do have a few favourites, but this one really was a favourite, and I think it took me 3 goes of going here to get the shot I wanted, just to get the sun on this side of the building. Only happens for about a month or 2 in summer. And obviously wouldn't have been blue originally. And again, I think this has been painted since I took these photos. But a great sort of streamlined hotel, porthole windows. I've always said this, to me, it wouldn't look out of place on Ocean Drive in Miami. And then down to Victoria to Shepparton. So obviously near train stations or any sort of terminus. There was these hotels because they had the accommodation, so people could either get off and stay at the hotels, or if they had some time to kill, they could go into the hotel. And again, put this in. It's not the fanciest looking hotel, but again, it just shows that diversity of design as you go around Australia, and the orange terracotta fins going up there, and really quite striking. Down to Seymour, which is just down the road from Shepparton, and again another one opposite the railway station. It's this one's with its little Juliet balconies coming off. Quite often you see there with the front door underneath where the corner junction of these pubs were, if they were on a corner. The thinner sort of metal ribbon writing, a bit more Gill Sands than your blocky Broadway type writing. And another little town, I think it's got, I forget what the population of Fish Creek is, but it's very small. Fish Creek Hotel, that real modernist design, all white. It's got the 3 speed lines running around it. Rebuilt after the 1939 bushfire that ripped through Gippsland, other parts of Victoria. Then down to Melbourne, which obviously has its fair share of pubs as well. Nowhere near as many as Sydney, but definitely some great ones, including the former United Kingdom Hotel in Clifton Hill, which I used on the cover of the book, which is actually now a McDonald's. So you can see I've photoshopped the Macca's signage off of this for the cover of the book, and the banded brickwork here is just sensational as a way to give some decoration to the facade, and then the sort of imposing, towering entranceway, leading up to the fins at the top. No colour terracotta added to this, as you'd find on Sydney pubs. Just left it in the natural earthy tones of the bricks. And here's a recent shot of it that I took at the start of the year, actually, when I was down in Melbourne. And you can see the McDonald's signage on there. it'd be great if it was still a pub, but as long as it's still standing, I think for me, even if it is a McDonald's, it's at least it's hasn't been knocked down. And here's the Orong Hotel, which I showed before, a bigger pub for Melbourne, really. Again, this was rendered at some point. It had exposed brickwork all through where the windows were originally. Interesting that it's a Foster's pub, because it's pretty hard to find a pub in Australia, probably in the last 20, 30 years, that actually sells Foster's beer. I think it's just something we export. No one really drinks it here, interestingly enough. It was done by the same architect as the last one, James Wardrop, well-known Victorian architect for some great Art Deco buildings. Here you can see another smaller inner city Melbourne pub from 1940, Crown Hotel. Interestingly, you can see on the left there where the cement circles are, which is a whole modern extension. A lot of pubs these days have been turned into what we call a gastro pub. So they've got quite a fancy restaurant attached, which is kind of ironic when pubs were always known for being able to get a cheap meal. Some now are more expensive than restaurants. Some still have good value meals, but this one in particular in Prahran has quite a fancy restaurant there. But I love the fact that they've just left the front of the old pub as is, and then they've built the modern extension out the back, keeping the integrity of the original pub. Another one here, a bit further out of the city in Essendon. Again, the same thing. They've kept the front of the pub, and you can see at the back there, they've turned it into a motel come weekly or monthly apartments, but kept the integrity of the front of the hotel, which still works as I think as a bar and a restaurant. Nice streamlined fin down the middle of it, and you'll notice how, to maximise the signage, you'd have the name of the pub across the front and then down each side of the fin, so it could be seen from each side of the road. Another small inner city pub in Melbourne, Swallow. Out of Melbourne to country Victoria again, to Ararat. This one built in 1939, really big pub. It is noticeable along the main street from just about anywhere. You can see the sort of two-story balconies there. It comes right down to where over the footpath, and even though there's been a bit of a modern extension of the footpath there in front of it, that would have been right up to the edge of the road. The cars would have pulled up before going in. That entrance would have been, the entrance underneath the first floor balcony there would have been straight into the hotel lobby. So some of the bigger hotels would have a separate little lobby area where you could check in. Smaller hotels, you'd usually just go to the end of the front bar to check in and try and get a room for the night. And you can see it's a bit of a mix. It's got this sort of streamlined aesthetic to it, but there's these geometric friezes above each window and doorways, giving it that decorative feel. Another one not too far away from Ararat, Bridgewater on Loddon. Another really small town on the river, but has this magnificent pub, streamlined, symmetrical. Again, it's got the entrance detail leading up above the roof, sweeping balconies. I'm just going to show one from down in Tassie. This is the Park Hotel in Launceston. There's not a lot of pubs Art Deco pubs left in Tasmania. There's a few in Hobart. There's a few that have been turned into different forms of accommodation, not working as pubs anymore, which has happened to quite a few around Australia, in fact. but I just put this in. I love the oversized fin down the front of it, which looks too big for the whole building. Interesting font as well, the typography there. And just across to Adelaide, another classic streamlined modern one here. Woodville Hotel, again, you can see how they've maximised the space for the hotel's name down the fin on each side and then across the front of the facade. Great streamline, and again, you can see where that inspiration from some of the English hotels or roadhouses. And you can see on the left at the end there, the West End Draft, which being South Australian beer. So that's state by state brewery owning the hotels. And country South Australia on the River Murray, Renmark. So this is right opposite the river, and back 100 years ago, the river was used as a main form of transport, steamships going up and down the river. So this pub is opposite probably one of the main jetties, areas where the boats would have pulled in. Remodeled in 1935. So again, another one of those big country pubs, Australian country pubs, given a Deco makeover in the 30s. Really big. Don't know how many rooms here, but yeah, quite a few. And then Toowoomba, which is a shipbuilding town in South Australia, to the mighty Hotel Bayview, another one of my favourites. Again, you can see a little bit of that, I suppose, Amsterdam school of design and detailing. You can see the little brickwork up the top here, the detail. Lovely use of the sign with the glass box behind. Unfortunately, not used as a pub anymore, just being used as accommodation. As I said, some of the purposes of hotels have changed. Not all can survive as pubs anymore. Some have had a revival in country areas, especially if there's workers or if there's mining with fly-in, fly-out miners. They often get converted into accommodation for them, because they already had a kitchen, and they'd use the lounge area obviously as a common area, and then they've got the rooms and accommodation upstairs. Then across to Perth, and there's a few in Perth, but one of the ones I really like is the Criterion. Again, a unique design, built as more of a luxury hotel in its day. Some hotels were built more as inner city boozers, I suppose, whereas some were built more with the accommodation in mind. And this was from 1937. It was a makeover of an older pub for the Swan Brewery. We had 70 rooms of accommodation, and each room actually had bathroom attached, which is quite rare, because usually you'd have a common bathroom in these pubs down the end of the hallway. And so that's a little tour around Australia, looking at some of my favourites that I photographed and made it into the book. There's many I photographed that are in the book that aren't in this presentation. So why were so many built? As I've touched on, there was a real consolidation of breweries at the start of the 20th century. In 1920, a lot of smaller breweries were getting bought out by bigger breweries. So there was quite a lot of competition. You can see these older style pubs would have been from the early part of the 20th century. Typical older veranda around the one on the right there. The horse and cart. And Australia's population was growing, not only in the cities, but also the regional areas. Towns were growing, the population was growing, and so there was quite quite a infrastructure building going on, and a modernisation of some of that infrastructure throughout Australia. Banks, department stores, cinemas, and pubs, of course. And even though there was the depression, it didn't really dent the profits of the breweries. The breweries were still doing very well during the depression, and hence they had the money to invest in new hotels, and they really became that form of advertising for them. Here's the Hotel Marlborough up in Newtown, far from where I live. So they were commissioning architects and architects of note, who were designing these modern pubs for them as a way to entice customers, to create, I suppose, a bit of a sense of escapism, a little sense of luxury for the everyday person. The Royal Hotel, unfortunately, no longer here. It's been knocked down. I love this photo with the delivery trucks out the front there. And this was one of the bars inside that pub. And I'll show you some more interior shots as we go along. And one of the other reasons really clicked for putting the book together on the pubs was the fact that there's just an incredible archive of photos of these pubs from when they were built. Both the Australian National University through the Noel Butler Archives, the Powerhouse Museum here in Sydney, State Library, Victoria State Library, New South Wales. There's a really good resource of photos to choose from as well. And so through the book, I didn't use many contemporary interior shots. I mainly used the original archival ones. So as I mentioned before, often set on corner blocks. Sometimes there might have been an older pub here that the brewery decided to knock down and build a new one. They might have just found a new plot of land that wasn't developed, that was on a corner. Or they may have just given a makeover to an existing pub. But being on the corner maximises the exposure they can get to passing traffic. Again, just using them as a form of advertising. You can see one of the ways they did that also was via the advertising signs that they'd have around at street level on the facade there in the tiles, and you'll see more of that as we go through. There's the United Kingdom Hotel again, the one from the front cover of the book. I think this is actually taken in the early 60s, going by some of those cars. But this is what it looked like before it was made into a McDonald's, or repurposed as a McDonald's. Premier in Newcastle. The shell of this hotel is still in Newcastle, but unfortunately a lot of it got damaged in the earthquake from, I think it was the late 80s. Another Cyril Ruwald design. You can see his use of the lantern up there. Seemed to be one of his signature architectural pieces that he would use. And you can see the font and the typography here. And again, you can see the advertising signs positioned around at street level. And the typeface was really a large part of these hotels as well. Here on the left, you can see Robin from the Robin Hood and the Broadway, where they've integrated the terracotta tiling, the name into the design, into the decoration that runs around the hotel. Different reasons for the name, but generally it was fairly descriptive of where the pub was, i.e. Woodville being a suburb in Adelaide, or Tea Gardens, a suburb in Sydney, and then the town of Mackay. Edward there, and again, as we saw before, the Prince of Wales, often after members of the English royal family. And sometimes patriotic names around Australian Arms Hotel. There's the Light Horse, and sometimes they were named after the ingredients of beer. So you had pubs like the Golden Sheaf or the Golden Barley as well. And here we have the Hotel Bayview, which is, yeah, I love this, just really unique. The big block cement letters put into the glass block, so you can imagine that lit up in the evenings. Would have been pretty impressive. And then the Piccadilly in King's Cross here in what I call the Pac-Man font. And like I said, quite often you had that thin, like Bill Sands type metal ribbon typography used, or this fatter style Art Deco fonts. And they even got quite imaginative with how much they reduced the lettering. And you can see here the H on the very left-hand side at the bottom there is so reduced. It's a rectangle with a line down the left-hand side. And even more so with the Hotel Ivanhoe, where the V and the A, I think, is the same shape. It's just been flipped around. Here's a few more. And they really were quite an integral part to the whole look of the hotels. That's how they were going to do the topography. And as mentioned, they had the advertising signs around the outside as well. You can see them here on the Imperial. And a lot of the breweries had their own team of artists working in-house, and these were reverse painted on mirror. Now they actually make reproductions of them, which is great because the pubs display them. So if you're walking around Sydney in some of the precincts where there's quite a few of these pubs together, it's really nice to see these replicated and used on the outside of the pub, and just adds a bit of authenticity to how they looked. And they mainly depict men with their sporting scenes of men playing rugby, cricket, Australian rules footy, surfing. Sometimes it was more about just promoting it for social occasions, society dances, pre or post theatre drinks, but more often than not revolving around sport. You can see here, so the earlier hotels before the real streamlining and that interwar functionalist style came about were quite a bit squarer, maybe a bit more what you call it, a sort of traditional pub building. But given Art Deco embellishments here with the terracotta sunbursts, you can see at the top. Again, at the bottom here, you can see where the advertising signs would have been in between the doors. This pub hasn't used the reproduction signs in there. They've used it for their own promotion and menu and stuff, which is quite often the case as well. Excuse me. And another earlier one. This one by the prolific Sydney warden, who did many of the ones in Sydney. Again, square design. And just opposite this pub in Sydney is this one. And it's interesting because they basically face each other, and you can see the two styles of Art Deco pubs within that one intersection. So here you have the magnificent Robin Hood Hotel in all its streamlined glory, facing off against the Charing Cross, which is the earlier style. And in fact, a lot of these architects, even within the space of a year or two, were starting to pump out these more streamlined versions. And you'll notice when I show some of the interior shots how the bars echo the shape, this streamlined shape as well. Another great streamlined corner pub, the Golden Barley. See the floor plan here. So the top bit here is more of the laundry, the kitchen. There is a dining room there and the stairs upstairs. So more of the servicing area for the pub. There's two-car garage there as well. And then this bottom section here was the bar. And I'll highlight just how big that front bar is when we have a look at the interiors. Yeah, so by the end of the 30s, most of these hotels getting built in this interwar functionalist style, almost a cookie cutter approach to building them. That's streamlined. They'll streamline in look and also in the way they were produced by the breweries, obviously trying to save money. These two very typical inner city Sydney pubs, corner position, 2 or 3 stories high, brick with the detailing. And the Civic on the right, I really like because they've used the blue terracotta, which is unusual compared to the usual green or toffee coloured. They often shared elements like freezers, glazed tiles, and you can see here, the same freeze has been used on these 2 pubs in country Victoria. I think it was the Ararat on the left and the Shamrock on the right, and they've just flipped this decoration here. Some more fins in the typical green. These ones are a little bit more intricate. So really quite say pared back designs, and then given these flourishes and highlights of decoration. Some were very streamlined in their decoration. Interesting, the one on the left, the green finial here is actually quite massive. You can't really get a sense of scale from here, as is the one on the right, actually. The one on the left, the green one here, is in a pub in country Western Australia, just outside Perth. And it's interesting because the rest of the pub there's no Art Deco design to the design or the facade of the pub at all. It's just had this massive finial plonked in the middle of it over the front door. Some more detailing. You can see how they use the brickwork as another way to add some decoration to it. More decorations, either in terracotta or the painted frieze. Stylized fauna. Often used in conjunction with the name to draw attention to the name of the pub. Yeah, and a great use of topography there. Sometimes a bit more geometric. And then tiling, the use of tiling was a big part of the design of these pubs as well, both on the exterior and on the interior. Often in these sort of neutral tones, and then highlighted with orange or green. One on the right there in the classic sort of black, orange, and yellow color scheme of the era. Here you can see it, the trim of the tiles into a side entrance to a pub. And one of the other nice decorative elements was under the awning above the footpath, the sidewalk. You looked up, you'd see the pressed tin in these great geometric patterns done by the company Wunderlich. And these were not just produced for pubs, actually. They were used for many shops. And you can still see it quite often walking down a high street or in a country town. If you look up, you might often see a bit of the Wunderlich pressed tin still surviving underneath. And you get a sense of it here from these two shots of how it combined with the other elements like the tiling and the entranceway with the LED light. So together, there's all these really nice decorative elements that are being used to give these hotels their look and feel. So unfortunately, not a lot of interiors have survived the decades since they were built, and many have had several iterations since the 1940s. And it's one of the reasons why I use mainly the historical images in the book to represent the interiors. Here you can see another classic long bar, complete island. So there's 360-degree service. Beautiful shelving that's mimicking the shape of the bar, and the bar's probably mimicking the shape of the front of the hotel. Got these fluted columns here hiding the supports for the shelving. But most hotels will still be containing some elements of the interior, whether it's a light fitting, whether it's still the original bar. So there's still some elements of the interior, sometimes the tiling, but mostly most of the interiors are not original anymore. Here you can see the Great Northern Hotel in Newcastle. As I mentioned before, shipbuilding town. So not only are there these great light fittings here, and I'll show you some historical images of this pub in this room in a little while, and you'll see these same light fittings and this mural on the right. So the mural on the left there is showing the shipbuilding of the town, and then on the right, a scene celebrating leisure time on the beach. But I just love those light fittings. Some glass etching on the doors. Quite often between the different areas of the pubs, there would be these glass etched doors. These are from the Winton, as I mentioned before, in inland Queensland, which was the home of the birth of Qantas Airways. So it's been celebrated here with these etchings done by an Australian sculptor called Daphne Mayo. So they enlisted, quite well-known artists to actually do the doors and do some of the interior design for this pub. Other elements like LED light windows. So the interior of these hotels was not just about looking modern and slick. They were designed with a purpose, which really was to be able to serve large volumes of beer. And you can see here, I mean, really, it was done at an industrial scale, and I'll show you some pictures of a bar when it was full in a minute. And you can see here the way the bar is just snakes around the whole surface area here, just to maximize the amount of counter space. You can see all the tiling inside as well as the tiling they'd have on the outside. showing here on the map. So it's the one I showed before. So that top wing up the top there is more for service areas like the kitchen. But down here, you can actually see the bar highlighted in orange. So it snakes from the lounge through the saloon bar and into the front bar all the way around. And here you have a pub just before closing, I'd say. I think this is taken in possibly in the early 50s as opposed to the 40s. I may be wrong there. But they used to get very full because of the 6 o'clock closing. So when workers were knocking off at 5, they were streaming into these front bars. Obviously a very male-dominated area, the front bar. They did have other areas, ladies' lounges, saloon bars, cocktail bars. And I love this picture of the guy in his shorts and bathers. I think this is not far from Bondi, this hotel, Bondi Junction. So I think this guy's just come out of the surf for a quick beer before closing. But you can see the numbers of people that would come in, hence the way the bars were designed. The 6 o'clock closing time was called the 6 o'clock swill, which was brought about by the temperance movement as an austerity measure. It remained in place in some states until the 50s and early 60s, believe it or not. But unfortunately, the consequences of that was some bad cases, obviously, of domestic violence and men coming home full to the tilt. So it's an interesting, I suppose, unfortunate response out of the temperance movements trying to curb alcohol consumption. And what happened, 90% of Australia's beer consumption happened in that hour between 5 and 6, between knocking off and 6 o'clock closing time. So probably responsible for part of Australia's binge drinking culture as well. So very, very clinical and industrial, some of these interiors. And I've put this one up because it almost reminds me of an operating theatre. And you can imagine that door at the back of the bar there, a patient coming out, laying down on a bed, ready to get operated on. It sort of has that feel to it. And with the tiling, and what would happen after 6 o'clock closing, they'd just hose it down and sweep, and that was it, cleaned up for the next day, ready to go.
Hi, Jeff. I'm just going to cut in for a second, if you don't mind.
Yep.
Are now 15 minutes over time. So if people need to leave, you can catch up on the recording afterwards. I'm not hurrying you up, but it is Friday night here. People might need to go out. But we are recording it, so if you do need to leave, you can catch up with the recording afterwards, and I'll give you back the microphone. There you go.
Okay, sorry. I'll whip through a little bit quicker now, just to finish off. So very, very almost industrial interiors, but beautifully anointed. Another one of those very long bars, and I'll just flick through them. This is an earlier one before the streamlining where it's a bit square, and you can see the fans up there. So you can imagine how hot, especially in summer in Australia, it would get with that amount of people in the bar, and probably all smoking cigarettes as well. So the fans, again, you can see on this one up the top, fans were quite an integral part to keep everything cool. Terrazzo was sometimes used on the floor. Lino was used, often in interesting patterns. I love the zigzagging of it on the left there. This one, the lino is used around the curvature of the bar. I mean, as I said before, there weren't just the public bar or the front bar. There was lounge bars, saloon bars, cocktail lounges, as well as ladies' lounges. Another great interior. I love this one here where they've actually done the cutout reverse of the pattern on the flooring. Little lounge bar. You can see the radio on the side here, fan up the top, tubeless steel furniture. But there was also cozy rooms as well, because some of these, which were more hotels for accommodation than drinking, obviously had areas for guests. There was smoking lounges, club chairs, a couple of great Art Deco mirrors, and the chrome ashtray. And the bigger ones, like I said, with more accommodation, had these large dining rooms. You can see it on the right here, the wood paneling. The wood paneling was used in, I suppose, more of the upmarket pubs as a way to make them feel a little bit more special than just being tiled. Another large dining room. Some entrances up to the accommodation. The one on the right there actually having a lift. And this is the pub in Newcastle I was talking about before. And you can see the light fittings still there. And there's that mural of the beach scene. And the interiors, some of the rooms would be fitted out with great Art Deco furniture, all that dressing table. And yeah, because we followed the English licensing law of having to have accommodation, it's why these hotels have that sort of sense of size to them. It's also why they have to have the name hotel, because it was part of the licensing law. But some were really big, and the one on the left there, the Mayfair, another Sydney Warden one, unfortunately not with us anymore. That was in King's Cross in Sydney. Aubrey Hotel Motel on the right there, still going strong. So there were places where people stayed. So in the time before motels, especially traveling through the country, they were used as accommodation for travellers also coming into the city. So country folk or interstate people coming by train, you'd often find them around the train stations, these big hotels where people would stay. This one in Orange, the Hotel Dublin, massive hotel. And so one of the other discoveries researching the book as part of the archives I came across were the yellow cards used by Tooth & Co. So they had teams of people going out, doing a yearly report on each of these pubs and periodically taking photos as well. So here you've got a photo from 1949, and then you've got another one down here from 1959. And so these great records of how the pubs changed or progressed. You can see this one here was knocked down. This was March 1930, and then by the late 30s, the Royal had been remade here. And here it is in 1970. I think they used these up until about 1973. Looking at everything from how many bedrooms, the structure, the toilet facilities, hot water, what it was valued at. And it was nice to come across these, because in a way I felt I was doing another few generations on version of recording what these pubs are, and how they look. So as we're over time, I'll try to just go quickly through Sydney hotels. As I said before, it really is the epicenter. There must be over 100 hotels I'd say, in Sydney. Not all fantastic as some of the ones I'm going to show you, but I'd say, yeah, definitely a real standout amongst the architecture in Sydney, and quite prominent, because there'll be parts of Sydney we'll go through, and I'll show you a couple of maps of walking tours I put in the book, where it sort of feels like there's an Art Deco pub on every corner. Here's 1939 by Sidney Warden, who, as I mentioned before, was one of the most prolific architects in New South Wales for the Tooth and Company Brewery. And here's one of the walking tours I put together was in the city. So I think there's about 9 pubs on this walking tour within about a kilometre. And you can see down the bottom here, the Broadway, Australian, Clare and Sutherland. Behind them was actually the Tooth Brewery. So there was quite a few pubs attached on the outskirts of the city block where the brewery was. And which is now, and here's one of the pubs that was attached to the brewery. You can see on the right there with that modern building there is apartments. So the brewery got knocked down a few years ago and has been redeveloped. This pub's been incorporated into a bigger hotel. You can actually see the little bit of the gate of the old brewery gate here on the right. The Civic, which I showed before. Home to many Australian rock bands during the 70s and 80s. It's from 1940 by Prevost and Associates. Different architects. This one's 1940 by John Haler. So called the Hollywood because it's opposite the former studios of 20th Century Fox and Paramount Films. And then serendipitously bought by Australian actress Doris Goddard, namesake but no relative as far as I know. She bought it in 1973, I think, and was the publican for about 30 years, and she was quite famous for picking up the guitar and singing a song behind the bar to patrons. Quite a different looking one, sort of Gothic influence to some of the detailing. Another great Art Deco walk to do is up Oxford Street. So you can see these arterial roads leading out of the city, just dotted with heaps of these hotels. This one, the Albury, no longer a hotel, unfortunately, but still standing. The Light Horse, 1939, another Sydney Warden hotel. The tea gardens up in Bondi Junction, and you can see the reproduction posters here along the facade and the walls, which, as I said, it's just a great touch to really have a little bit more of that authenticity about these pubs in the contemporary setting. And there's the Charing Cross again, 1935, Sydney Warden, and the Robin Hood across the road. Definitely one of my favourites, the Robin Hood. The other walk that I've put in here is an inner west walk. I think there's 12 pubs on this one, and there's a few more that would just be off this map as well. But I tried to keep these walks doable as walkable. I probably wouldn't be doing a beer in every one of these pubs, or you might not make it. Here's the Erskineville, the Marlborough, which we saw a historic image of before, up on King Street. The Imperial, who, if anyone remembers, the opening scenes to the movie Priscilla, Queen of the Desert were filmed in this pub. Again, you can see the reproduction advertising signs at the front here. They really are a part of the contemporary landscape, especially in Sydney. Here's the Henson. It's actually quite close to me. This pub was quite derelict. It was going to get turned into just a room full of pokies, and then it got bought by a consortium of people that turned it into a family-friendly pub because the demographics of the area have changed, and a lot of these pubs are now getting turned, as I said, into gastro pubs and getting enjoyed by a whole new generation. And many pubs still have bands. You can still go and see bands. So just quickly go through a few more hotels at the Canterbury Club. Another one of Cyril Rewald's, and you can see his use of the lantern up here again, and this use of the phoenix sculptures around the top there. I think in reference to the fact that the Canterbury Racecourse is a few streets away, so you would have had people back in the day getting out at the train station and probably filing into the pub for a few illegal bets on the GGs before going across to the race course. Again, another Cyril Rewald one where he's used the lantern up the top here, and you can definitely see that influence of buildings like the Comet that we showed before. This was 1939. The Eastwood, so suburban pub. And so not only were they built on those arterial roads coming out of the city, but they're also built on the high streets, near the train stations. North Annandale, Koori Foreshore, not far from the old dock area. So the Koori Pine used to come in, which was used for building quite a lot. The huge St. George, former Rockdale Hotel, painted green at some point in its life. Would have just been all brick. I'm not sure what colour the terracotta was, the detailing. The Hunters Hill, beautifully built into that curving bit of land. The Petersham, the streamline bit on the left, the doorway is actually an extension from a few years after the pub was built. This is by Rudder and Groot, 1938, and the side entrance was 1940. Another one not far, Kirribilli Hotel, not far from Sydney Harbour Bridge. Another out in the suburbs pub, the Auburn. Then we have the railway. And again, this is only a selection of some of them. There are so many in Sydney, but some of these smaller suburban pubs are just dotted around everywhere. And that is it. So sorry for going over time.
Absolutely not a problem. It was absolutely fascinating. I had no idea that Australia had that depth of Art Deco architecture. None. So absolutely fascinating. I might even endure the flight now to go and check some of these places out. Thank you so much. Just so detailed. Absolutely fantastic. I was going to ask, why did they build so many? But you answered that. And we had a question in the chat to say, have you got any pictures of the interiors? Which you also showed us. So I think what I'm going to do, as we overran a little bit, is just say thank you so much. Thank you for getting up so early. Probably back to bed now. And
I might need to.
Yes, and thank you for everybody that stuck with us. And this has been recorded, so you'll be able to, when we've edited it, you'll be able to watch it back again. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. Have a good evening or have a good morning, depending on where you are. Absolutely fascinating, and really look forward to the reprint of the book. If that happens, please let us know, because I really want a copy of it. Thank you so much, Jeff.
We'll do. Thank you very much. Thanks, Jo. Thanks, everyone.
No worries. Good evening, good morning. Bye-bye.
Bye.